let's get started. So hello everyone, my name is Brianne Lowe. I'm sorry my video is for some reason not activated. So wish I could at least make it look like we were here in person, but today I'm going to present to you the basic overview of our NRCS programs and the opportunities we have for conservation. As was stated earlier by Kate, we're going to have a whole series of our various specialists coming up over the next couple of months on these webinars that will dive far more deeply into the overview that I am going to cover today. But it's always good to just kind of see the big picture first before we take some of those deep dive in. Before I get started, I did want to just kind of pull, I don't know if you can add your little emojis or thumbs up, but how many on this call of those of you that are here have heard of NRCS in the past? Because if you haven't, that's okay. There's nothing unusual about that. In fact, it's getting to be encouraging because since I started about 18 years ago, at that point, nobody raised their hand, but the number of hands going up is definitely increasing, but we know there's still more opportunity to get the word out of what we offer. So where did we start? Everyone, hopefully everyone, has heard about the Dust Bowl. This occurred back during the era of the Great Depression. It was sort of this cumulative, just piling on of stressors at that time, when erosion was such a big impact on farming communities. But it was actually, the true Dust Bowl itself was actually further west, at the western edge of Canada, Oklahoma, into Colorado, and in that part of the country. And that is the Dust Bowl that we often hear about in the books and literature, see in different documentaries, as it were. The Black Sunday event that brought that dust to Washington, D.C. all came from out there, but what that overlooks is that there was also a drought here, and there was soil movement and erosion occurring here. Hopefully you can see clearly enough on your screen that the upper right-hand picture is actually Highway 421 here in Indiana. Going north and south, you can see how bad the dust is blowing there, and actually all of these pictures are from Indiana. The one in the lower left-hand corner is a gully that had eroded away in Daviess County. And you can see even here, as somebody is trudging along the highway, how much soil is running off the crop field. And this is a problem because obviously the way a nation supports itself is with healthy soil and keeping that soil where it can grow our food. So NRCS began out of the Dust Bowl. At the time, we were called the Soil Conservation Service. That changed back in 1994 when we realized we were conserving far more than just soil and water health, and we became the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And we are here to help America's farmers and forest landowners conserve our soil, water, air, energy, wildlife, plant, human. We've added so many different resource concerns since that time, and just our natural resources in general. All of our programs are voluntary, and we can actually offer technical support for your operation free of charge without any contractual obligation. You don't have to participate in our programs. We are still able to come out and meet with you where you are to see what would be the best way and best option for filling the needs for your operation. And we do this because we know producers are searching for ways to optimize the inputs and maximize profits with environmental responsibility. We know that your farm needs to be economically viable. You need to be able to make money on your farm, but you can do so in a way that sustains your resources, makes it productive in the long term, and protects water, air, and wildlife concerns for not only your farm, but your neighbors and the general public as well. We also want to make sure we're clear that we offer assistance to what is called in the Farm Bill, the historically underserved producers. This includes limited resource farmers, beginning farmers, socially disadvantaged, and military veterans. Depending on which program, HU producers can be eligible for higher payment rates, payment advances, and priority for funding. So that is something to keep in mind as we do go through this. If you have ideas about different practices that might fit your operation, there may be opportunities to help, especially as we know many people are beginning in this realm of farming, and getting a little boost at the beginning can really help get that operation going. So when I say that we can provide technical assistance, what that is that science-based approach to conservation. It allows us to walk your farm, ask you what your resource concerns are, what your goals are for the land, and also maybe help you identify potential areas of a concern that you weren't familiar with, or maybe hadn't caught your attention, or didn't seem like it was a concern. But when we can talk through what we observe on the site, you know, it's always nice to have a different set of eyes out there. So this is, again, like I said, a service that is offered at each of our county offices. We have coverage in every county in Indiana. We don't necessarily have a physical presence of an office in every county, but we do have staff that cover every county in Indiana. And I'll put up a QR code at the end where you can find your local office. So our goal is to give our customers that personalized advice. So that technical assistance is the first part of everything we do when we are working with our participants and our farmers. And our services can end there. We can provide that advice, offer alternatives that you can select from, and you can take it from there. But if some of that technical advice really piques your interest and it's something that you want to implement, but maybe where you are in your business operation is not conducive to financially being able to support that move, or you need some assistance in getting there, we do have our financial assistance programs. And admittedly, that is one of our more popular offerings as an agency. So the financial assistance programs depend on what that program was defined as in Congress and in law, and also defines what that program can assist with. And we'll get into some of those. The Agricultural Conservation Easement Program is a very big program in reality. And I know this particular webinar is geared towards small farms, so I'm not really going to hit on it too much. There is in Indiana 2 ways this can happen: the ag land conservation easements. Those ones require an entity to support the program, and we only have one of these enrolled in Indiana, although we're seeing more interest in potentially protecting ag land through these easements. It's just not currently available here until we find some good partnerships. What we do have here are our wetland easements. We are one of the highest enrollment states in the nation. We have a really robust wetland reserve program, and that restores areas that historically have been challenging to farm because of the wet conditions. They just want to go back to what they were naturally, and so we can support that. But again, those tend to be larger. I mean, it's a minimum 15-acre enrollment, but typically it's larger, 40, 60, 80-acre sizes that make it into that program. But we do have 2 financial programs specifically for those production acres you have that may be of more interest. So one being the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the column there on the right, where producers receive assistance to implement conservation practices and address natural resources concerns that we talked about during that technical assistance part. And then we have the Conservation Stewardship Program, which takes conservation to the next level. So as you've implemented some of these practices and you have got conservation really embedded in the framework of your operation, Conservation Stewardship Program takes you to the next level with additional payments for enhancing conservation on your property. So again, this all starts with that conservation technical assistance, and that is actually a Farm Bill program. It doesn't come with financial assistance directly to a producer, but it is that information sharing assistance that is available. It includes this lovely Venn diagram of a 9-step process, but I'm here to tell you that this 9-step process is no different than any other decision process you do in your day-to-day life. It's identifying problems, determining your objectives, figuring out what you already have available to you, and then deciding where you want to take that from there. Deciding which alternative works best for you, implementing it, and evaluating it. So whether you're buying a new refrigerator or starting a no-till operation, how you make a decision and then determine if it was the right decision is pretty similar. When we're out on your farm doing the technical assistance, these are the resource concerns that we typically are evaluating. Obviously, we were the Soil Conservation Service, and soil is still the foundation of what we're looking at. We're also going to check your water resources, not only for potential contamination, turbidity, but also availability. Do you have too much or too little? Air quality is obviously a concern in different parts of the state. We also look at those plants and animals, both domestic and wild. If you have livestock, we're going to look at if the resource concerns related to livestock are addressed, but we're going to also look at wildlife if that's something you're interested in. Pollinators obviously are very important to the production on small farms. Energy is something we're also dabbling in these days. It's actually becoming quite popular, becoming more energy efficient, and there's different ways we can assist looking at that depending on the operation and the practice. And we also look at that human concern because obviously no farm is possible without human resources. So the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, by far our largest and most popular program in Indiana. Looking at 2023 statistics, we had over 888 contracts affecting 125,000 acres for $36.5 million of assistance to Indiana producers. There are three parts to the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. First being the producer, that would be you. The producer needs to be an individual or entity. So you need to be producing food, fiber, livestock, or other agricultural product. We do have adjusted gross income requirements. So there is a maximum of adjusted gross income that you can have in order to participate in our programs. I believe that is at $750,000 a year. That could change as we go into a new farm bill time. And you need to have signatory authority for your farm. For your land, you do need to have control of the land, and we need to have proof of that in some form. That might be a deed, a rental agreement, some sort of written lease or authorization from the landowner if it is not you. Your land must meet conservation compliance provisions, which says you did not convert a wetland specifically for the purpose of this farm after 1985. And that really erosive land. We want to protect that soil. It needs to actively be in production. Oh, hey, my videos. Hello, everyone.
Hopefully it'll start.
And I'm not sure.
Oh, there we go. We can see you, but we just can't hear you yet.
So any of this come through?
Yeah, now we get both video and audio, so we're good.
Okay, that was weird. Okay, so I'm just going to recap in case that didn't come through. The land does need to be actively in production or capable of production, and then have a resource concern present. And that resource concern is what we identified during that technical assistance visit, that there's a conservation need and that we do have practices available to address it. Alternatives can then be selected, and if those alternatives are available through our EQIP program, we can definitely consider that option. So let's talk about some of those practices that could be included in the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. First, and probably one of our most popular, is cover crops. The purpose of cover crops is to reduce erosion, maintain soil health, improve water quality. So there's a whole host of resource concerns that this can address. Some things to consider on these small farm areas is that small areas mean a small amount of seed. So we have a specific way of calculating what types of cover crops can and the quantity that is needed for these small farms. And then for small vegetable production areas, that rotation can be complex, and making sure that you get a cover crop of 4 the right crop at the right time is important. So we want to make sure, and we'll work with you, and our specialist or urban health specialist will work with you to make sure we pair the right cover crop with the right operation. The one everyone always asks about is the high tunnel system. So high tunnels are there to improve the plant health and vigor resource concern. You need to be able to consider what type of high tunnel you want, where to locate it, how will that impact the rest of your operation, the site preparation and construction that goes into it. High tunnels are costly. It's really important to get those bids ahead of time, because sometimes even the flat payment rate that comes through EQIP is not sufficient to cover the entire cost. I do want to go back and say EQIP is never intended to be 100% cost or 100% payment. This is not specifically a grant. This is a cost share or a payment rate agreement that you have with the government. It is a contract with the government. And generally, we would anticipate 75 to 90% of the cost of a practice could be covered by EQIP, but that all depends on the market rates. And EQIP has a set flat rate at the beginning of each fiscal year, and sometimes that varies on how much it will cover. So I always want to make sure people definitely are looking ahead and planning before you put these high tunnels in, or any of our practices. It should be the case for any of them, that you make sure you get bids and have an idea of what it's going to cost you. Low tunnel is a relatively new practice that we have for small farms. It is a lot smaller, a lot more cost efficient than a high tunnel, and can provide protection, improve that plant productivity and vigor, and reduce plant pest pressure. So it is a small scale practice, but you can look at it and see where can it be used. Sometimes it can be used in conjunction with a high tunnel as well. Look at the materials that can be used. It's just a lot more low key practice overall, and kind of a good starting place. Oh, sorry about that. We do have opportunities for composting facilities. It's there to reduce the pollution potential and for handling organic waste, making sure that isn't getting into water systems. It is a way to produce a soil amendment to add organic matter and improve soil condition. Composting facilities, you really need to consider, where are you going to put it? What types of compost material are you going to have in there? How do we safely handle those materials, particularly those organics? So things to consider. So examples you see here of composting bins up in the upper right-hand column on your screen is one of our small farms in northwestern Indiana. They use industrial mulch and leaf compost from the community. It's a Perkins farm, and they always like to share what they do, but it is space. It takes a lot of space to have one of these on your farm. How will you manage it? How will you turn it? Do you need to turn it? There's a lot of questions to make sure it's going to, again, fit in your operation. All these practices have a lot of great benefits, but if it doesn't work well for you, it's not going to benefit your farm. I'm going to just glance over. If you do have a slightly larger area with a forested component to it, we do have forest stand improvement that can go in and make sure that we're keeping that forest stand healthy, looking at that overstory, releasing trees. That can be a benefit to you and your operation in the future. And then prescribed grazing, whether it's small or large, making sure that we're utilizing those forages within your farm in a useful way, making sure livestock have adequate water supply, keeping livestock out of streams and creeks, and making sure that they can also access that clean water while keeping our water clean for the future as well. So rotational grazing is part of this. It can be time and labor intensive, so that again needs to build into your operation in a way that's meaningful. That's just a smattering, like a sprinkle of what we offer through EQIP. It is extensive what is available out there, but just to give you a taste that it's a wide range of opportunities, but it is a wide range of opportunities that we can build upon too as we move forward with your operation and as you discuss what you need with your conservationists. Now let's talk briefly about the Conservation Stewardship Program. Let's say you're already doing some of these practices, but you think that your operation is ready to take some next steps and to do something even more intensive and more conservation minded, but also really great for production purposes. In 2023, we had 279 contracts. That's gone up even this year. I don't have those numbers yet, but we know it's gained in popularity this year. 179,000 acres for $19.9 million. Conservation Stewardship Program, unlike EQIP, which really addresses that very targeted resource concern at that very targeted location that concern is, this is incorporating your whole farm. So we're looking at your whole farm. How is it interacting with each other, different parts of it, different components of it? How can we incorporate the conservation across the whole board? So it is a requirement that the whole farm that you have control over be enrolled in it, and that it meets some baseline conservation levels. So if you've got a back 40 or a back half acre that is got some serious resource concerns going on it, we can't ignore that and pretend it's not there for the purposes of this program. We'll want to address those, get those concerns addressed, and bring everything up to that baseline level in order to enroll it in CSP. But again, in CSP, I'm going to show you some of these same practices we just talked about. I'm going to get a sip of water here, but show you how this takes it to the next level. And so these come with enhancement payments. So excuse me for 1 second. So looking back at the cover crops. Cover crops in EQIP might start out with a very basic mix. Where we start, if you've never done cover crops before, is with something that will winter kill, as long as we have a cold enough winter. So a winter kill cover crop might be something like oats and radishes. When we get a deep freeze in late February, both of those plants succumb to the freeze. And so that's minimal cleanup in the spring. Usually by that time, the radishes have completely dissolved and created that soil profile, helped with the soil profile. The oats may be mulching the top. So it's a great way to get started feeding that soil biology throughout the year. But then you can go right into planting it. With cover crops and CSP, we're going to look at more complex mixes. The one at the bottom is obviously a whole field, but that is like a 15-way mix used during the summer, so it was allowed to bloom. It probably went in after wheat, and it's there to help build that soil during that time between wheat and a future harvest in the following, or future crop in the following year. But this can also occur in small farms, in between rows, maybe during an in-between period between your crops. There's different ways that we can incorporate it. So different ways to do this and really take it to these more complex and next level mixes. Some other things we can do that are specific to small farms, like planting food trees and shrubs, which is an enhancement that allows you to put that windbreak in. It provides some wildlife, specifically pollinator benefits, but also allows you to have access to some of these forage-based foods and opportunities. It may protect your farm from wind that is coming in from a particular direction. It can protect it from those can be a view protection as well, but it also can help maybe even with drift from, say, like a dusty road, which may not be ideal necessarily for the fruit production itself, but it kind of depends on the time of year that harvest occurs. Mulching for weed suppression is a very popular enhancement for our small farms. It's a way to use straw or other natural material to mulch and keep those weeds down. It also is going to help build that soil quality depending on the material you use. Something that some producers are interested in because it has a visual appeal. Who doesn't like to offer opportunities for photographers to use your field for sunflowers? But we can use sunflowers both in rotation for production, even canola. You can see that's canola at the bottom. That adds a flowering component. Since both of these are being added to your crop rotation, that means you're going to go to seed. That's something we typically don't allow in cover crops. We don't want them to go to seed because we don't want them to reseed themselves. So this isn't a cover crop, but a crop rotation. We're looking at what you already do in your operation and adding these flowering crops that will go to seed that can then, depending on your operation, if it's small, canola is probably not going to be something you sell, but you may sell sunflowers or sunflower themselves or the seeds from your operation. So it's something else that we can incorporate in. So just again, there's the number of CSP enhancements is even more extensive than the practices themselves. So each practice we had in eQuip probably has a whole list of potential enhancements and ways to utilize it in CSP. And CSP does offer the opportunity to implement practices as well. It's just they tend to be at a lower payment rate than the enhancements. CSP does come with an annual stewardship payment as well. So if you're maintaining this baseline level of conservation, you're going to get an annual payment as long as you implement these enhancements and take it to a next level. And so that's a real great opportunity if you're already doing all of this conservation already and you're ready to take it to the next step. It's a real great opportunity to look for that additional assistance for your farm. I touched on briefly that there is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. I actually was the program manager for this prior to 2016. It's a really cool program, and if you have the space, if you have a larger farm that might have some floodplain area or some low-lying ground that's just never productive because of the wet conditions, this is something to definitely consider. It puts a permanent easement on it. It can never be converted back into anything development-wise, farm or residential, nothing of any sort. We pay 100% of the restoration cost to get that wetland back out there, and we're approaching nearly our 1,000th easements around Indiana. We protect more wetlands than the Fish and Wildlife Refuges combined in the state. We see fantastic responses from wildlife. Migratory birds are showing up in capacities and numbers and species that we have just never seen before. And it's really cool to see that response. And as you can imagine, the number one practice we do in this would be wetland restoration. The ag land easement is challenging because this requires a partnership with an entity that can hold the easement. So while in the wetland example I gave you, the US government holds that easement, NRCS helps manage that easement in the long term. For the ag land easements, we need a partner. And so we're seeing interest in that. If that is something you are interested in seeing more of in Indiana, definitely reach out to us. I can connect you with the current easement program manager. We're looking to know that there is interest in these kind of farmland protection programs, but then that gives us the ability to tell potential partners that have expressed interest but aren't really sure if there would be landowner interest in these types of protections, give them the but give them the reason specifically to look into this opportunity. So how do we get to those financial assistance? What are those steps? That's part of that planning process. So the step one you see here, that planning, is that technical assistance visit I mentioned multiple times throughout this presentation. It is the core of what we do here. Then there is an application period. Everything I discussed today is an application. There's a ranking process. There is no guarantee that you will be funded. So typically, the more steps you're willing to take to address resource concerns, take those resource concerns to a very high level of conservation will earn you more ranking points. And the higher your ranking points, then the more likely you are to get funded. It does, right now, we do have the Inflation Reduction Act funding available. We're done with this year's cycle, but we'll be going into next year. So that does expand that pool of funding we have. We also have a number of partners who are doing resource conservation partnership program agreements that allow you to do something very similar to what we've talked about through these that are also available. So there's a lot of funding opportunities out there, but they are all competitive. And so that is something I want everyone to keep in mind. Eligibility, that goes back to those three foundations I talked about before. Are you eligible? Is your land eligible? And do you have a resource concern? Then, of course, there goes the ranking. And then if you are funded, you can then we get into the implementation phase. It is a government contract. There is a time frame. You have to implement these practices. Generally speaking, from the time you apply, and applications are the first cutoff for those applications, which we do take all year, but the first cutoff generally around November or December. So that's when our next round cutoff will be. We're in the process now of funding those applications that were accepted this year. So if you think about that, if you're planning these practices this year with your conservationist, your local staff, you apply, we're now into next spring or summer for that funding, and then we're in a phase we can implement. So this is not fast. You know, it's the government. Sometimes things move at a molasses pace, but just thinking for your planning purposes, how long this can take. Once you are funded, then you can begin. Don't begin before, because for most of these programs, if you start a practice before you are funded, that makes you ineligible, and we'd have to cancel that application. Once you're funded, then you can begin, and you need to implement one of those practices within the first 12 months. Our contracts can last 5 to 10 years. We'd prefer they last around 3 to 5. And you can space practices out within that. And I'm specifically talking about EQIP here, but you can space practices out within that. But you always have to start within the first 12 months of signing that contract. For CSP, that is a 5-year contract, guaranteed 5 years of those stewardship payments, and you will have 5 years to implement that enhancement that we talked about. So now I want to bust some myths that we have heard in the past and make sure we're all on the same page of what is and isn't allowed. And that first one is the agricultural product income. There was a time when the Farm Bill required at least $1,000 of agricultural product income, but that is no longer the case. You just need to be able to produce fiber, food, livestock. So there is no minimum or maximum size of a farm, and there is no minimum farm production income. Subsistence agriculture, or land to produce for yourself, is also not prohibited. So if you are gardening, hunting, fishing, gathering, managing indigenous food sources, it doesn't even have to specifically be indigenous food sources, you are still eligible for EQIP. So if you are doing things to produce these products, you are eligible. There are other things that can come into play, like I mentioned in that earlier slide, but it is not specifically this factor that determines eligibility. Backyard gardening was once considered not eligible, or often is deemed not eligible, but that is not true. Going back to that sort of subsistence page, as well as that minimum income, if you are producing food, you are assisting in feeding the country, whether that's your family, your community, your neighbors. It's still important, and we still want it done in a way that is sustainable and conservation minded and sustainable for you. Community gardens are also eligible. This was also a myth that was commonly out there. Community gardens are extremely important to many of our communities, and we want to see them be sustainable to have that soil health that will maximize that production in the long term. And determining land eligibility for EQIP. The myth was that it's not our job to determine the eligibility or certify it. That's FSA's job. But we're here to help certify that eligibility for our programs. Farm Service Agency, an agency we really haven't talked about today, is our sister agency. They're where you're going to start to get your land enrolled into the program, get your name into our system. We can't do that on our end. They hold the database for that. But we're still going to work with you to look at, is your land eligible for EQIP? Does it have a resource concern we can address a practice for with a practice? So basically what we're saying here with this myth is we're going to help you through the process the whole way through. No matter how big or small, no matter the size of your operation, no matter what you produce, we're here to help you. And if we don't have a practice that specifically addresses a concern you have on your farm, maybe it's not a resource concern we deal with, we probably have a partner that we can connect you with that can at least provide you that technical assistance. Cropping history, that a producer must provide production records. We're not looking anymore at how long have you been producing. We don't need that crop history evidence, but it is your responsibility to provide documentation that the land is eligible for EQIP, that it is capable of producing, or you are producing crops out there. And that may just be that we walk out there and take a look at it. I already went over the timeline for the program, kind of what that looks like throughout the year, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You can look at Gov Delivery for some information and for notices when things come up. And these are all of the various partners that could assist you. As I mentioned, if we don't have something for you, there's a chance that we're connected with one of our Indiana Conservation Partnership groups that can. So this is a whole host of them. A lot of these are wildlife-based because when I'm not outreach coordinator, I'm the biologist in my real daytime job. So but it's just to give you an example that we are working with so many different groups out there. And so whatever your concern is, if we can't help you, I guarantee we can connect you with someone that can. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and put up the QR code on how to contact your local office and open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So as we finish up, if you have a question, pop that in the Q&A box and I'll read it to Brianne. And Brianne, can you just tell us a little bit about your background, like with the wildlife biology and how you got started working with USDA?
Sure. While we're waiting for questions, I can definitely do that. So I have been with the Natural Resource Conservation Service this will be my 19th year this fall. I actually my background is in wildlife and wildlife management from Purdue University and Southern Illinois University. And I've been in Indiana. I started with the Conservation Partnership monitoring those wetland reserve program easements that you saw, so doing the habitat evaluations on those. But I briefly worked for the Indiana State Department of Agriculture before starting as a soil conservationist here with NRCS. My specialty has been the habitat management side since I started. So I came to Indianapolis to manage that wetland program beginning in 2011. And then I've been in our state biologist role since 2016. And where I'm really focused on in that is helping our county offices that this QR code link will connect you to with any wildlife habitat management you may want to do on your property, no matter how big or small. So we have a lot of interest in small pollinator plantings on these small farms to assist not only with aesthetic beauty because we like pollinators, but to also obviously assist with production. If you go larger, we can start looking at things for quail habitat, deer habitat, turkey habitat, or managing your woods for different purposes. So it's a fun, very wide-ranging opportunity and job to be in. But I've been filling the outreach coordinator role since November. Hopefully there'll be a permanent person here in the next couple months, but it's been fun working with connecting people with all our information in the meantime.
So, so one of our questions is, so what would it look like for someone who has never worked with USDA, NRCS, or FSA? So you explained a little bit, the first thing they do is they find their local service center and they would meet with an FSA agent and get their farm number, all of those things. And then how does the handoff work to NRCS? Will the FSA service center help with, or that they call NRCS and kind of re-explain what their farming practices look like and what they hope to do? Or can you go into a little more detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you are actually welcome to contact either office. We're usually co-located, not in every county. Like Marion County, for instance, doesn't have an FSA office nearby, and our office that handles Marion County, the Hendricks County Danville office, doesn't have an FSA office. So they're not always co-located, but you can go into any service center office anywhere in the state and establish that record working with Farm Service Agency. But if you come to us first, we're going to help connect you with the Farm Service Agency as well. The key for the Farm Service Agency is, one, getting your name in the system that makes you eligible for, helps start that eligibility determination. It's FSA that's going to look at things like adjusted gross income and did the highly erodible land and wetland conversion compliance part of it. That's their database. But if we're co-located or not, they're pretty much going to walk you across the hall. That may be, hey, you can go meet them at this office or call this number to meet with NRCS, or vice versa. Hey, you met with us first, let's get you connected with FSA somehow. So we work very closely along those lines. And once you're established with FSA, that allows us to get you into our system better. If you aren't ready to make that step, though, we can just take down some basic information from you. We can get you in our system in a very what we call sort of brief technical assistance way, which means
Mhm.
your data saved. That way we can call you in the future if there's opportunities, but you haven't gone through the whole lengthy process of having the deed and everything that FSA will require. So we have multiple avenues there. We're here to help you however you're ready to do so.
Awesome. And then we have another question from Dawn Marie, and she wants to know a little bit more about the managing wetlands in Indianapolis. And could you say more about that and where those locations are that you worked with?
In Indianapolis specifically,
That's what it says. You mentioned
meant
managing wetlands in Indianapolis. Was it in a different place maybe where you worked doing it?
I worked in Indianapolis
Oh,
covering that wetland reserve program around the state. So we actually don't have any of those
let's
wetland
see,
reserve
Brian, you're
easements here in
frozen on my
Indianapolis.
screen. We may
Oh,
have to email Brienne and find out a little bit more about that.
can you see me
Oh,
now?
Brienne, you're back. Yes, now we
Uh,
can see you.
the irony is that here I am working in our office where we're supposed to have high-speed internet, and it's glitching out worse than when I
It's
telework.
okay.
Okay, so when I said I was managing wetlands in Indianapolis, I meant that I was here based out of our Indianapolis office managing the program that was out around the state. So those wetlands actually are in the historically wet areas of the state. There's not many of that in Indianapolis, and a lot of it's been converted to
Okay.
development anyway.
Yeah.
So that's what I did with that. They're all around the state. Those ones that are publicly accessible now because the state bought them are like Goose Pond in Greene County, TNC's Newton County's Kankakee Sands, Eagle Marsh, and the Limberlost up in the northeast. And then there's a bunch of publicly accessible easements down near the Muscatatuck in the southeast.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for joining us today. And sorry about the technical difficulties, and
It is
hopefully
what
that
it is.
won't happen again. I think Zoom's just having a hard time today, but I really appreciate your time, and we'll get this on our YouTube channel and get that posted. Well, yeah, we're looking forward to doing more of these webinars, and thank you so much for helping facilitate them.
There is another question in the
Oh,
Q&A. Is that something you want me to
sure.
address?
If yes, if you'd like to do that, I'll put answer
Um,
live. There you go.
all right, so so there's nothing that requires our easements to sign that requires someone to sign away their right. So it's everything we do is voluntary. So when farmers come in and enroll in those programs, they are given a very clear outline of what the limits are going to be on that area, what the restrictions will be. There is a payment that comes with that. It's based on what we call a geographic area rate cap. So it's comparable to basically saying if this didn't have an easement on it versus if it does, what is that difference in the valuation of that property? And that's what that geographic rate cap payment rate is for that land. And it goes on the deed. So in the future, if someone purchases that land, it's really the responsibility of the title company they use to purchase that land to reveal that that easement is on it. There's not just government farming easements on these lands. There is a whole host of things, whether that could be a mineral easement or a power line
Yes.
easement people don't even realize. So that's just part of the process that goes with real estate. So it is voluntary. Nobody is telling anyone they need to give that up. And there is an option for a 30-year versus permanent one. I'll be honest, for most of us, 30 years is permanent. But it does mean that eventually that easement can be removed down the line.
Oh,
Not
that's
sure if that
interesting.
answers the question or not.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Oh, and there's one more. And she just said, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you
You're
too,
welcome.
Brittany, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I really appreciate it and hope that you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks for having
you.
me.